In the quiet suburbs of Riverside, California, on October 6, 2003, the life of Kimberly Long would change forever. A night of fun with friends would descend into a nightmare, leaving one man dead and one woman fighting for her life. This is the story of Kimberly Long, a case of love, betrayal, and a murder mystery still unsolved. It was a typical evening. Kimberly Long, a 27-year-old nurse, spent the night out with friends, never suspecting the horror waiting for her at home. Returning that night, she found her boyfriend, Oswaldo Conde, lifeless, brutally beaten on the couch. The nightmare was just beginning. Kimberly dialed 911, frantic, but the paramedics were too late. Oswaldo Conde was dead. What happened in the hours that Kimberly was away? Who could have committed such a brutal act of violence? Within days, Kimberly Long found herself under arrest. Despite her emotional 911 call and claims of innocence, the police turned their sights on her. The evidence, a motive rooted in jealousy, a timeline full of inconsistencies, and a night of heavy drinking. But the truth, it was murkier than it seemed. Prosecutors argued that Kimberly was in a jealous rage, fueled by alcohol. They said she had returned home and beaten Oswaldo in a fit of anger. But there was no physical evidence linking her to the crime, no DNA, no fingerprints. The jury, however, believed otherwise. Years passed, but questions about Kimberly's conviction never faded. Her defense team, armed with new forensic evidence, uncovered inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. A timeline that didn't add up, a confession from another man, dismissed too easily, and most shockingly, the lack of any blood evidence on Kimberly, despite the gruesome nature of the crime. In 2016, after over a decade behind bars, a judge overturned Kimberly Long's conviction, citing reasonable doubt. But the story doesn't end there. The district attorney's office was not ready to let go. Kimberly Long's fight for freedom was far from over. Even after her release, Kimberly remains in legal limbo. The Riverside County District Attorney's Office appealed the judge's decision, seeking to put her back behind bars. Kimberly is free, but not exonerated. Her nightmare continues, and a question still lingers. If Kimberly didn't kill Oswaldo Conde, who did? Her defense team continues to argue her case, citing evidence that another person could be responsible for the murder. But will the courts listen? Or will Kimberly Long be forced to return to the walls of a prison, guilty of a crime she insists she didn't commit? Kimberly Long's fight for justice continues, with no end in sight. A life torn apart by tragedy, a woman determined to clear her name. But will the truth ever be fully known? Or will the shadow of doubt linger forever? After 16 years, Kimberly Long was finally free. Exonerated, but forever changed by the nightmare she endured. Today, she walks as a free woman, but the scars of wrongful conviction will never fully heal.
All right, so are you ready to dive into a case that'll seriously make you question everything you thought you knew about justice?
Oh, I'm ready. Always up for a good head scratcher.
It's the story of Kimberly Long, convicted of murder back in 2003.
Yeah.
She was released from prison in 2016,
Okay.
but she's still in this fight, this battle to clear her name.
I see. So
It's going to be a wild ride trying to untangle this whole thing and
Right.
really figure out, was she wrongfully convicted? Or is she guilty of just walking free?
all right, let's get into it. What do we got to work with here?
Well, we've got court transcripts, forensic reports,
Wow.
even some interviews with people who were actually involved in the case.
Okay.
It's fascinating. This case, it's not just a whodunit.
Right.
It really makes you think about what justice even means,
Yeah.
especially when it seems like the system, may be messed up.
I hear you. All right, well, let's start at the beginning. Set the scene for me.
Okay, so picture this. It's October 6th, 2003, in Riverside, California. Kimberly's out with some friends having a good time enjoying her evening. But later that night, when she gets back home, she finds her boyfriend, Oswaldo Conde, dead.
Oh, no.
He's on the couch.
Dead on the couch.
And it's not just that he's dead.
Okay.
He was brutally beaten.
Oh, wow. That's awful. I mean, can you imagine walking into that? The shock, the horror.
It's hard to even...
This wasn't like a peaceful passing or something.
Yeah.
We're talking about violent scene.
Right,
The kind that really stays with you, even if you're a seasoned investigator.
right.
And then you have Kimberly right there in the middle of it all, making this frantic 911 call. She's hysterical, clearly distressed. I mean, think about it. If you were the one who did something so brutal, would you be calling for help?
I mean, you'd think your first instinct would be to panic.
Exactly.
Maybe even try to cover your tracks.
Right? Get out of there, clean up, anything but call the police.
Right. But the prosecution, they had a different theory, a whole different story.
What was their take?
They latched onto jealousy as the motive.
Oh,
They pointed to these inconsistencies in Kimberly's timeline and the fact that she had been drinking that night.
so they're painting a picture of her kind of snapping.
Yeah, basically saying that she just lost it.
But if she was guilty, why call the cops? It doesn't really add up.
That's the thing. It all felt a bit shaky. The whole case, it was built on circumstantial evidence.
Interesting.
They had no DNA, no fingerprints connecting Kimberly to the crime scene.
So no smoking gun, so to speak.
Exactly. They leaned really hard on eyewitness accounts.
Which we know can be really unreliable, right?
Right.
Especially when you throw in alcohol and the stress of that whole situation. Plus, it's been a while. Memories can get pretty fuzzy.
Absolutely. Details get mixed up. People remember things differently. It happens all the time.
Right. So you've got this shaky evidence, a questionable motive, and yet...
And yet, the jury still came back with a guilty verdict. Kimberly was sentenced to 15 years to life for second-degree murder. It really makes you think, how much do we rely on gut feelings, versus hard evidence? What does beyond a reasonable doubt even mean when we're talking about real people's lives?
Well, that's the heart of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we even begin to process that?
Right.
I mean, jury trials, we rely on them, but they're not perfect. They're influenced by biases, by perceptions. Even the way evidence is presented can sway things.
Absolutely.
And in Kimberly's case, you can't help but wonder, did the prosecution's narrative, their storytelling, did that overshadow the lack of actual physical evidence? Did it convince the jury, even if there were these gaps?
Right, because if they didn't have solid proof, how did they manage to convince a jury to send her away for so long?
It's a good question, and it speaks to the power of a compelling story, even when it's missing some key chapters.
And throughout all of it, all those years, Kimberly maintained her innocence.
Wow.
Year after year, locked up, she never stopped fighting.
She must have had incredible strength to keep going, to hold on to that hope.
Then 2016 rolls around, and things take a turn.
What happened? What changed?
Her defense team, they uncover new evidence. And this evidence, it throws the whole case wide open.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. What did they find?
Well, for starters, they started to poke holes in the original timeline.
The one the prosecution used to build their case.
Exactly. They presented this really tight window of opportunity, but this new evidence, it suggests that the time frame might have been wider than they initially thought.
So basically, they're creating space for other possibilities, other scenarios that weren't considered before.
Right. It's like they found this missing puzzle piece that suddenly changes the entire picture.
I love those moments in an investigation where everything you thought you knew shifts.
And then on top of that, there's this bombshell, a confession.
What? A confession? Hold on. Who confessed?
It came from another man who had a connection to both Kimberly and Oswaldo.
Okay, so this wasn't just some random person trying to get attention.
No, not at all. This guy, he knew things about the case, details that weren't public knowledge.
Wow. And what happened? Why wasn't this brought up before?
The defense argued that his confession, it was dismissed way too quickly during the initial investigation. Like they were so focused on Kimberly, they didn't even consider other possibilities.
It's that tunnel vision we talked about. When investigators get fixated on one theory, it can be hard to see anything else, even when there's evidence staring them right in the face.
Right, and that tunnel vision, it can have some serious consequences.
Absolutely. In a criminal case, it can be the difference between justice and a miscarriage of justice. And that's what makes this case so fascinating and so disturbing. We're talking about someone's life hanging in the balance, and it all hinges on how evidence is interpreted, how stories are constructed, and whether those in power are willing to look beyond their initial assumptions.
Okay, so we've got this shaky timeline, and we've got this confession that was basically ignored. But the thing that really seemed to get the judge's attention, the lack of blood spatter on Kimberly.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
I mean, with a crime this brutal, you'd think there'd be blood everywhere.
Yeah, you'd expect some serious splatter. Not a clean scene, right?
No, not at all.
So the prosecution, what do they say about that?
Well, they tried to say she could have cleaned up, gotten rid of her clothes.
Okay, but remember, they were so set on this idea of a heat-of-the-moment attack.
Right, like she just snapped.
Exactly. Does it really make sense that someone in that state of mind would suddenly stop and meticulously clean everything?
Yeah, it doesn't really add up.
No, it doesn't. So walk me through the blood spatter analysis. How does that fit into all this?
Okay, so basically, blood spatter analysis, it's like having a silent witness at the crime scene.
Okay.
It can tell you a lot about what went down, like the angle of impact, the force of the blows.
Right.
You can even see the movements of both the victim and the attacker.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. And the analysts, the experienced ones, they can read those patterns like a roadmap.
Fascinating.
And in Kimberly's case, the fact that there wasn't any blood on her clothes, her skin, anywhere, really, it just doesn't line up with her being the one who did this.
Okay, so let's recap here. We've got this messed up timeline. We've got a confession from someone else that was totally brushed aside. And now we've got this lack of blood evidence connecting Kimberly to the crime. Sounds like a pretty strong case for reasonable doubt, wouldn't you say?
It was definitely enough to convince the judge to overturn the conviction.
Okay.
But this is something people always get mixed up about, when they're talking about true crime and stuff.
What's that?
Reasonable doubt, it doesn't actually mean innocence.
Right. It's a crucial distinction.
It just means that the prosecution, they didn't prove their case. They didn't meet that burden of proof for a guilty verdict.
Gotcha. So she's free, but she's not exactly in the clear.
Exactly. Kimberly walks out of prison, but that suspicion, that cloud, it's still hanging over her.
Man, it must feel like such a hollow victory, you know? Like you're free, but you're not really free.
And to make matters even worse, the DA's office, they decide to appeal the judge's decision.
Oh, wow. They're not giving up.
Nope, they're not letting it go. So Kimberly, she's stuck in this awful limbo.
Right. Free, but not free. Like she's always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
It really shows you how messy this whole justice thing can be.
Yeah.
It's not always black and white, cut and dry.
No, not at all.
Makes you think, what does justice even look like in a situation like this?
Right, because is it enough to just let someone out of prison when there's reasonable doubt?
Right.
Or does real justice mean going further, finding the person who actually did it, holding them accountable? I mean, what about Kimberly? What about the year she lost, the trauma of all of it?
It's true. We can't forget about the human cost.
Absolutely. This wasn't just some abstract legal case. This was someone's life.
She spent over a decade locked up for something she might not have even done.
Yeah.
Those years are gone. You can't get them back.
And the trauma, the stigma that comes with a conviction like that, it stays with you.
This case, it really shows how our justice system, even though it's supposed to be fair, it's not perfect.
Right.
It's run by people, and people make mistakes.
It's true.
Evidence gets misinterpreted, judgments get clouded, and sometimes it's the innocent people who end up paying the price.
And even when the system tries to correct itself, like in Kimberly's case, the damage is already done.
Exactly.
It's a long road to try to piece your life back together after something like that.
And it's important to remember, this case isn't over.
Oh, that's right. It's still ongoing. What's happening now?
Kimberly's legal team, they're still investigating. They're trying to find more evidence.
Yeah.
The kind that could really prove her innocence once and for all.
Okay.
And on the other side, you've got the DA's office. They're going full steam ahead with their appeal.
They really want to put her back behind bars.
It's like this back and forth, this constant battle. So we're left with this big unanswered question.
Yeah.
If Kimberly didn't kill Oswaldo, who did?
And will they ever face justice?
It's this question that just lingers, this mystery that's still unfolding. And I think it takes us even deeper into all the complexities of forensics and the legal system and what truth even means in these situations.
Absolutely. And it raises some uncomfortable questions about how we as a society define justice, how we balance individual rights with the need for accountability, and how we grapple with the possibility that sometimes the system gets it wrong.
It's like we keep peeling back these layers of the case, and with every layer, it just gets more and more interesting. But I keep thinking about that confession.
Right.
If we really want to figure out what happened to Oswaldo, we can't just ignore it.
No, absolutely not. It's a big piece of the puzzle.
It feels like such a loose end.
In Kimberly's defense team, they're not ignoring it. They're really digging into it, trying to understand this guy, his connection to Kimberly and Oswaldo, what his motive might have been, why the investigators brushed him off the first time.
It makes you wonder, how do you go back and look at a case after so many years?
Right. It's tough.
Time changes things.
Memories fade.
Evidence gets lost.
People move on.
Some of the people who were involved might not even be around anymore.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing, and the ones you do have are faded and worn.
Right, but that's where those investigators, the really good ones, they come in.
They're like detectives in a time machine trying to piece together the past. They're digging through old files, tracking down witnesses, and they're using all this new technology, these forensic tools, to re-examine the evidence to see if there's anything that was missed the first time around.
Just like they're trying to find new clues in an old story.
Exactly. And sometimes that fresh perspective, those new tools, they can reveal something crucial that everyone overlooked before.
So while all this is going on, this search for the truth, Kimberly's in this impossible situation.
Right. She's out of prison, but it's not like she's really free.
There's still this suspicion hanging over her, like a shadow that just won't go away.
It's like she's being punished twice.
Yeah.
First for a crime she may not have committed, and then for the simple fact that there's still doubt.
It makes you think about what justice really means. Is it enough to just let someone out of prison? Or is there more to it than that?
That's a big question, right? Does true justice mean clearing her name completely? Making things right for all that lost time? Finding the person who really did it and making sure they're held accountable?
These are hard questions.
They are. And there aren't easy answers. But I think by talking about these cases, by shining a light on them, we can at least start to have these conversations. We can demand more transparency from the system, push for better investigations, support the organizations that are fighting for the wrongfully convicted.
It's about trying to make the system better, even if it's just a little bit.
Exactly. Because even small changes can have a huge impact on people's lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Kimberly Long's story, it's clear there are a lot of unanswered questions.
A lot of loose ends.
This case, it really makes you question everything.
Yeah. It challenges our assumptions about guilt and innocence, exposes the flaws in the system, and shows us the very real human cost of getting it wrong.
But it also shows the power of resilience.
Right. Of never giving up on the truth, even when it feels impossible to find.
Kimberly's story isn't over yet.
It's still being written.
And the ending, it's still uncertain. But her case, it's this powerful reminder that the fight for justice, it never really ends. It takes constant work, vigilance, compassion, and an unwavering dedication to uncovering the truth, no matter how difficult it might be.
And that's something we all have a role to play in. Staying informed, staying engaged, asking questions, demanding better, because the truth matters. Justice matters. And Kimberly Long's story reminds us that these are fights worth fighting.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.